We are here in Banff National Park in Alberta, Canada, for the scheduled opening of the Cave and Basin Interment exhibit, which unfortunately was cancelled at the last moment due to severe flooding in the area. National Parks Canada officials went beyond the normal call of duty and, in spite of the opening's official cancellation, welcomed with a special exhibit preview tour the many visitors and community leaders from all over Canada who somehow managed to overcome weather issues and got to Banff for this important occasion.
So welcome under some really interesting circumstances. As you can imagine, with the city of Canmore under a state of emergency, people losing their homes, and various highway road closures, we postponed our exhibit opening this morning. Minister Kenney couldn't even make it from Calgary, as you well know. So as soon as we determine when the minister is available, we will be getting back to Ivan and the rest of the Canadian First World War Internment Recognition Fund to let you know when our opening ceremony is, because we do want a proper opening ceremony for this. So what we've arranged for you today, because you've made the effort to come here, is a sneak preview of our exhibit. So there'll be no formality with this, there'll be no speeches with the exhibit, but allowing you, because you're here in town right now, to share this with you. We'll open it for you for about half an hour and then welcome you back here for food and goodies, and of course to see our new Cave and Basin National Historic Site exhibit.
The official ceremony of this historic exhibit was to have been conducted by Canada's Minister of Citizenship, Immigration and Multiculturalism, Jason T. Kenney, seen here 5 years ago in May 2008, presenting a $10 million endowment from the Government of Canada for the creation of an Interment Recognition Fund.
Today I am pleased to announce that we are following through on this commitment. The Community Historic Recognition Program and the National Program will support commemorative and educational projects that are both community-based and national in scope. The CHRP will make funding available for communities that were affected by wartime internment measures and immigration restriction measures, communities such as the Ukrainian Canadian community. As part of this program, the Government of Canada has decided to provide $10 million to the Ukrainian Canadian Foundation of Taras Shevchenko. This will establish an endowment to fund projects related to the First World War internment experiences for affected communities such as Croatian Canadians, Serbian Canadians, Ukrainian Canadians, and others.
Subsequently, thanks to the mentioned government grant, the Canadian First World War Internment Recognition Fund was formed and was represented here today by its chair, Ivan Grbezic, who felt the exhibit's location was quite appropriate and properly reflected the historic context.
Without commenting on the contents of the exhibit, as you can tell from the building behind me, it is a new structure. The location of the exhibit itself is in a great location, given that just across from where we're standing here, where the actual is the site of the internment camp. And people will see once they get into the exhibit that they will relate to the closeness of that site and the importance of this location.
Among the dignitaries that actually made it to the cancelled exhibit was Bishop David Motyuk of the Ukrainian Catholic Eparchy of Edmonton.
Despite the inability to have the official opening with all the dignitaries and Minister Kenney, I'm very grateful that Parks Canada has provided us an opportunity to view the exhibit. And I'm pleased. I think is this that it really tries to tell the story of a dark chapter in the history of Canada and the Europeans, in particular the Ukrainians, and the injustice that was done to them. So I hope that it'll provide some justice where justice was taken from them many years ago. So I hope that many people will come and have an opportunity to visit the exhibit.
Parallel to the educational work directed by the Canadian First World War Internment Recognition Fund, the Cave and Basin Interment exhibit in Banff National Park entitled Enemy Aliens, Prisoners of War, Canada's First World War Internment Operations, 1914 to 1920, was designed as a separate project by Parks in Canada to educate Canadian and international visitors about this little-known chapter in Canadian history.
You know, for us, our role was to tell the whole story of national internment. There definitely was a component of it here in Banff with the Banff and Castle Camp, but our mandate was to tell the whole story from 1914 to 1920 of all the 24 camps across the country. We definitely knew from our stakeholder meetings and also with focus groups with the public that people know very little about the First World War history, and almost to a person did not know anything about First World War internment, let alone what was happening with the worldwide recession prior to the war breaking out, war happening, and then Canada deciding through the War Measures Act to have internment operations in the country. So we knew that we had to throw that context in there for people to set them up. So we tasked our research group to delve a lot into as much of the primary documentation as we could. And there was a fair amount there. We actually found quite a few internee letters, and we spoke with descendants, interviewed them. And so a lot of that perspective and voice of the internees themselves comes out in the exhibit. But we also brought in the perspective of the other people involved in the internment story. So that's the government officials, the guards, and even what the Canadian public were thinking at this time. So we tried to backdrop the story with a bit of the social, political, economic, and of course the wartime environment that we had there.
Visuals of the internment exhibit were under embargo until the future official opening. Also present here today were descendants of internees, with Jerry Bayrak having comments of a very personal nature.
I had 3 generations of our family in there. My great-grandmother, Anna Hanshruk, was in Spirit Lake. My grandfather, Nikolai, and my grandmother, Felicia Hanshruk, were in the camp. My uncle, Edward, he was in the camp when he was about a year old. My mother was born at the Spirit Lake camp, and she was baptized there in the little Ruthenian chapel. Mom she died about a month after her 92nd birthday. She was the last survivor of all 24 camps across Canada. She was born in Spirit Lake. She died January the 13th, 2008, which was 93 years to the day that the camp opened. But yeah, I get very emotional. I still feel that it's too watered down. It's still making it sound like it was a 2-year retreat or something, which it wasn't. Like I say, Spirit Lake, the inmates or the prisoners cleared 600 acres of land. And then they were left out the gate and left with nothing.
Council member Douglas Davis, representing the German community, also felt the exhibit was not evocative enough.
Well, I think in some ways you really don't get a feeling of how poorly treated some of the internees were, especially those of Polish and Ukrainian descent, and any of the other Slavic peoples that had come from Austria-Hungary. And I think that was underplayed a little bit. I'm sure most Canadians who probably never even are aware of what happened will be quite surprised by it and perhaps even shocked. And that's even with a milder representation than I would have thought possible.
Many communities are represented on the Endowment Council of the Canadian First World War Internment Recognition Fund and also had appropriate comments.
The prominence of this place, I think, is good enough to attract a lot of people to come to Alberta, and when they come to Banff, this is one of the places that they shouldn't miss. Okay? They should come here. They should actually learn about the internment story and about their grandfathers, grandmothers, and the generations that came before them. This is an important site. Some may argue about its architectural design. That's always open question, right? But the fact that it does exist represents a major accomplishment for all Canadians in terms of building up the Canadian history.
The Canadian cultural community was also present at this historic occasion.
I think that people who are not familiar with internment will come in and have a very good snapshot of what went on. I think the exhibit does a lot to raise the questions, and I have a feeling that people will leave wanting to know more. And the wanting to know more is not only from going online or reading, but myself as a dance director and creator with the Shumka Dancers of works about the internment, it might whet their appetite to come and see the work that we produce in Shumka. So I think they've done a really good snapshot in an exhibition like this, and you can't do it all, but they've done a great job capturing it.
Among those traveling to Banff for the cancelled exhibit opening was producer Ryan Boyko, who is working on the development of a feature film to present this Canadian internment story.
The film is called Enemy Aliens. It's a feature film about 2 brothers. It's a fictional story. These brothers come from Ukraine to Canada, get caught up in the War Measures Act as people who are identified as enemy aliens, and they have to have their papers stamped every month. And at one point, it doesn't quite go so well, and they become interned. So it's their story. It's the story of survival, struggle. They come to this country to create a better life for themselves, and it doesn't quite go as well as they had planned.
All in all, there were 24 internment camps across Canada holding 8,579 men from 1914 to 1920. Today was an important validation moment for the Ukrainian-Canadian Civil Liberties Association that started work on recognition of this issue over 20 years ago.
This was an internment camp for innocent men held here against their will, under armed guard, behind Canadian barbed wire, not because of anything they'd done wrong, but only just because of who they were, where they'd come from. So the first thing that I hope all your viewers will appreciate is that this is a welcome moment, but it's also a solemn moment. It's a moment that calls for commemoration and reflection. It calls for a pause rather than praise. That said, I do want to underscore that this is an accomplishment for our community nationally. This is the development, the installation, the opening, although not yet officially, of the only permanent exhibit dealing with Canada's first national internment operations, and it's right here in the heart of Canada's national park system. You couldn't ask for a better location, right beside where an internment camp once stood, in the heart of Canada's national parks, where these men were forced to work for the profit of their jailers under duress. So, solemn and yet welcoming.
Parks Canada has been very cordial and allowed us to come in and view the exhibit. I think it's very important for those Endowment Council members who have worked very hard with Parks Canada historians to tell this story, to come and actually view the exhibit and see what has transpired and what it looks like. As far as in the internee descendants, I think it's very important for them to be here today to view this exhibit and have that preview and get a sense of a reconciliation. As an internee descendant, I am very pleased that there is this piece of Canadian history in Banff National Park, in Canada's jewel. And I am thrilled that this story will be told, and it will be told to not just Canadians, but all visitors and tourists that come to Banff to view this beautiful Banff National Park and Cave and Basin. But they're going to learn a bit about Canadians' history, what happened to our families, and to understand that we've survived.
This project was a fine achievement for Parks Canada, with the rescheduling of the official opening at some point in the future. But for the Canadian First World War Recognition Fund, the full mission still lies ahead.
So what's come out of this story is we know who's been interned. Ukrainians, Croats, Austrians, Hungarians, Poles, Czechs, Slovaks, Montenegrins, Macedonians, and a number of others. Turks, Bulgarians, Romanians, Armenians. And obviously the largest number were Ukrainians, and the largest number were civilians. We know where the camps were, 24 camps across Canada, 4 camps here in the Rockies, and most importantly, the site that was here. But the part of the story that is yet to come out is why it took nearly 100 years for the story to come out. And that is the challenge of our Endowment Council, to get the story out, to get the raw research, the personal testimonies, the first-hand research, so that our government historians and other historians have more sources and information to reach.
Hope. The CHRP will make funding available for communities that were affected by wartime internment measures and immigration restriction measures, communities such as the Ukrainian-Canadian community. As part of this program, the Government of Canada has decided to provide $10 million to the Ukrainian-Canadian Foundation of Taras Shevchenko. This will establish an endowment to fund projects related to the First World War internment experiences for affected communities such as Croatian, Canadian.
because we do want a proper opening ceremony for this. So what we've arranged for you today, because you've made the effort to come here, is a sneak preview of our exhibit. So there'll be no formality with this, there'll be no speeches with the exhibit, but allowing you, because you're here in town right now, to share this with you. We'll open it for you for about half an hour and then welcome you back here for food and goodies and of course to see our new Caven Basin National Historic Site exhibit.
The official ceremony of this historic exhibit was to have been conducted by Canada's Minister of Citizenship, Immigration and Multiculturalism, Jason T. Kenney, seen here 5 years ago in May 2008, presenting a $10 million endowment from the Government of Canada for the creation of an Interment Recognition Fund.
Today I am pleased to announce that we are following through on this commitment. The Community Historic Recognition Program and the National Program will support commemorative and educational projects that are both community-based and national in scope.
And got to Banff for this important occasion.
So welcome under some really interesting circumstances. As you can imagine, with the city of Canmore under a state of emergency, people losing their homes and various highway road closures, we postponed our exhibit opening this morning. Minister Kenney couldn't even make it from Calgary, as you well know. So as soon as we determine when the minister is available, we will be getting back to Ivan and the rest of the Canadian First World War Interment Recognition Fund to let you know when our opening ceremony.
We are here in Banff National Park in Alberta, Canada, for the scheduled opening of the Caven Basin Interment exhibit, which unfortunately was cancelled at the last moment due to severe flooding in the area. National Parks Canada officials went beyond the normal call of duty and, in spite of the opening's official cancellation, welcomed with a special exhibit preview tour the many visitors and community leaders from all over Canada who somehow managed to overcome weather issues